Hi, this is the manager's desk. My name's Evan Baltz. I'm a marketing technology leader and a team builder. You've probably heard it said multiple times or read it on LinkedIn or seen multiple memes related to the concept that people don't leave organizations, they leave managers, specifically bad managers. Well, what's interesting about that is I've thought that to be true. And in the past, I've thought about it like you could have a decent organization and end up with a bad manager who could make your life miserable for some of the reasons that we've talked about in previous podcasts. But the more I think about it, the more that I'm beginning to go away a little bit from that mentality. And here's why. And it's funny, as I was thinking about this earlier this week, I happened to see on Instagram a post, and I don't know who the person is, but the title of the post was Companies Won't Fire Toxic Bosses. And she said companies will hemorrhage great people because they are leaving bad bosses. So this is interesting, right? Because then this brings up another element of this. Is it truly bad bosses and the organization is great, but somehow there just happened to be somebody who's a bad manager or a bad boss, and a number of people got stuck under them and then left? What's the problem with that thinking, though? Right? Maybe you're onto it. Maybe the person who posted this on Instagram was skirting around the edges of it. Is it truly a good organization if they allow bad bosses, bad managers to continue to be in positions of management? Right? Think about that. There's no way that you don't know that there's a bad manager in your organization, right? You're going to hear about it. HR is going to hear about it. Employees are going to complain, and they might go to multiple levels to figure out a way to have something change because it's making their life miserable. An organization that doesn't address that and continues to promote people into management positions who aren't good managers and evaluate them and promote people into even higher level roles, directors and VPs and executives, that creates an environment where bad managers are rewarded, they're kept in place, they are looked over, and we point the fingers of blame at the employees instead. Well, this manager is getting a lot of production out of our workers, right? But at what cost? Like we've talked about that before. What cost? Your internal culture is completely falling apart. You have now a number of people in leadership positions that probably shouldn't be there, and they're making the regular employee's life miserable. So, why is it that organizations don't put in place ways to weed out bad managers or bad leaders? It's an interesting question. And I've thought about it for a long time, many years. I've thought about that particular question. Why does that happen? And I think there's a couple of reasons, and see if you agree with these. One, usually a manager has been hired into that position or promoted by a higher level person, say a VP. That person doesn't want to acknowledge that maybe their hire or their promotion of a person was a mistake. They don't want to be seen as, hey, I made a bad hire. So they will do whatever they can to sort of cover that air. Now I'm talking in general terms, but that's one reason why that might be allowed to continue. And in doing so, they've created an environment where it will happen by other higher level leaders. The second one, I think, is just the concept of performance and how that's evaluated versus people skills, right? So there are occasions where you may have a really bad people manager who manages, at least for some period of time, to crank out a lot of work. And executives sometimes don't care about how that impacts employees as long as the bottom line is being impacted positively. Problem with this is that's short-sighted, right? That only lasts for a season. You can't continue to run employees down and expect them to stay in their positions and expect them to be loyal or to be happy and content in their job. So eventually that model crumbles. But here's what happens is those people will leave and that bad manager will hire more and do it again and go through another cycle of burning out employees, but producing results, however that's evaluated, as if the humans in the mixture aren't part of the results, right? As if having good, high performing employees that are also happy and content and well compensated, as if that doesn't matter. But I'll tell you, it does for the employees, and it's incredibly important. So those are at least two reasons why I think it's allowed to exist. The third is money, right? We mentioned bottom line in terms of performance, but also raises and promotions. And a bad manager will tend to keep that money for themselves or for other leaders and not give it to their employees, which probably in some way saves the organization some money. But here's the thing, again, very short-sighted because I'll hear somebody say, well, that person quit, we saved $75,000. No, you didn't. You didn't, because you're going to have to rehire somebody now, which is going to cost tens of thousands of dollars in man hours and equipment ordering and training and everything else, on top of the fact that you probably had to hire a contractor while that person was being replaced at three times, five times the rate that you were paying the existing employee. So it's short-sighted. So organizations that allow bad managers to continue to exist are actually the problem, not the manager themselves. Now, the manager doesn't always know that they're bad, right? Sometimes they don't know it, but the organization likely does because they've heard about it from the employees, but they choose not to handle the situation. One way in which I think organizations attempt to steer people away from looking into that any deeper is by saying, well, we're conducting management training or leadership training and bring in an outside source and sit through a couple of conferences or a couple of online instructional things or some HR training that will make you a better manager, right? Unfortunately, unless those skills are rewarded, people will continue to do the things that they see get them ahead, right? Which might mean um, overly working their employees. Again, this only works for a short time, right? But maybe just enough time to get that bonus or just enough time to get your own promotion. It can be very self-serving. So while it is true that people at their core might think to themselves, oh, I'm quitting that organization because I have a bad manager. Ultimately, the organization is responsible for that bad manager and haven't put in place any ways to ensure that they meet a standard or that they are truly helping and coaching and bringing up intelligent, smart, hardworking employees without burning them out. It's just so often it's not rewarded, right? Hey, you have a great team, but we're not going to reward you for that because we feel as if we prefer the manager who saved money by not giving out raises. Again, this is very short-sighted. But it's interesting because it happens that most organizations have this problem. They have the problem of a bad manager. I'm going to make some recommendations and we'll talk about some specifics of it in a future podcast, but I'm going to make some recommendations for your organization and how to address this. The one is you have a review cycle. Almost every organization has some kind of formalized review cycle, right? But what happens? How does that normally work? Your manager reviews you, right? Their manager a director or a VP does a review of them, who reviews people upwards, right? It's always downwards. So you can set the narrative, right? So, for instance, if I have a team and I'm really beating on them and they're frustrated and unhappy, when I do my self review for my executive, I'm going to say things like high performing, right? I'm not going to mention that they all hate me, that they're about to leave the organization. So my manager up the chain probably thinks, "Oh, great job," right? They don't ask. They don't talk to the people who work for me. They don't do skip levels, or they don't formalize the review process. Many organizations do a company-wide review and they ask basic questions about how you feel about the culture and the workload and life work balance and health benefits and all of that. But the results are usually somewhat anonymous. And when they come back, they're usually vague, right? And there's mixed responses. So, hey, you scored a 50 out of 100 on this. Maybe we're doing okay. Maybe we can improve. What it doesn't do is it doesn't point out the people who are causing the lower scores. It never addresses that. There may be one bad manager that is responsible for bringing the scores down, but it doesn't really point that out. And most organizations are afraid to address that. And so they don't. Or they provide coaching or training, which also doesn't really solve the problem unless you're doing a constant check in with the people who report to that manager. So it's important to do, some places will call it a 360 review. Um, or whatever. There's multiple ways of kind of looking at it. But here's a way to proactively do it as a manager. Survey your own people. Ask them questions and have them fill it out anonymously and complete a survey on your performance and ask about soft skills, not just, hey, we increased our throughput. How good am I at that? But ask about soft skills and then see what your people think and then recommend that to the rest of your department or your organization that each manager does the same thing. At a place I worked some time ago, this is exactly what I did. I surveyed my own team. In fact, I do this just about everywhere that I've been. I surveyed my own team, shared the results publicly, and then talked to other directors, managers, VPs, and suggested that they do the same thing. Hey, evaluate yourself rather than always telling everybody else what to do. Ask them how you can improve, get some survey results from your own people. But unfortunately, when I have suggested that, no one has ever taken me up on that offer. And a bad manager is not going to ask for input. So it has to be forced on them. And the organization is responsible for that, for setting up a system where you can get a report from the team members about their manager and how they perform. And it's got to be very specific. Now, the first thing that will come to an employee's mind is they're going to know who said it and they're going to retaliate. And the truth is, in a lot of organizations, that's true. That's what happens, right? So you have to go out of your way to make sure that the feedback collected is anonymous, that there's no chance that it's associated with a specific person, because what happens is you can give a manager the ability to retaliate against employees who maybe said something negative. So you have to eliminate that. And you can't just say it because trust me, every time a survey is given out to employees, they suspect that it's a trick, right? You can be as honest and open with them about, look, I don't know who says what. And don't ask specific questions like, what part of the country do you live in? And are you a male or a female? Are you a remote worker or an in and out? Anything that would tip somebody off as to who that is. One of the biggest things that I've seen in the past too is if someone complains about another manager or whatnot, and they're confronted with that. Hey, your employee says that you were too harsh, you yelled at them, they felt like you were treating them poorly. The first uh, question that you'll receive from a manager who is probably well on their way to being a bad manager is who said that, right? Who said it? And the reason they want to know who said it is because they want to build a case against that person with, well, that's just Dave. He's a negative impact on everybody. So we got to take what he says with a grain of salt. That's not a good sign. If that's what's happening, that's not a good sign. A better response that you would receive from someone who truly wants to improve would be, that's not good. I can't continue to have people feel that way. What can I do to improve? How can I improve? But it's important that it's evaluated and that it's absolutely dealt with. There is nothing more demoralizing or worse for an organization or for culture than for bad managers, bad directors, bad VPs to continue to exist and continue those behaviors. Those behaviors have to be confronted, they have to be dealt with, they have to be reevaluated to see that there's improvement, right? It has to go full circle. Otherwise, you're just creating an environment where it can continue. And you'll go through a cycle where you'll be productive, you'll think things are good, and then 6 months later, half the team quits. And then that cycle repeats and repeats and repeats. And it's amazing to me that someone at the top of an organization wouldn't like start asking questions about that. Hey, maybe we need to see why people are leaving beyond just saying, well, it was a bad manager. You're responsible for that bad manager and for correcting it. And just having them take some classes or some management training is not the solution. There has to be full circle evaluation. So I think the meme that I saw about companies won't fire toxic bosses is onto something, right? It's not just about the bad boss. It's about the organization that won't deal with it. I'm not saying that they all need to be fired. They need to be evaluated and reevaluated on a regular basis with specific outcomes in mind in terms of feedback improving from the employees that are in their care. I take those kinds of things very seriously, and I hope you do too, as a manager, as an employee. If you're a leader in an organization, please address these items with senior leadership. Bring them up, talk to them, and then ask the question, if we're not doing it, why aren't we doing it? And why aren't we starting to do it? What are we afraid of? What don't we want to hear? Right? The higher up in the chain that you get, the bigger that paycheck is, the more unlikely you are to ask feedback about yourself, right? Because of what it might mean. And that's a tricky situation. And I understand that. However, it is important for the organization to insist that as a manager of people, that you have the skills and the ability and are consistent to take care of those people in your charge. Make their lives better. Make them better employees, not employees that want to leave. If you have thoughts or comments on this, please leave them in the comments section. I always like those. Again, you can listen to these podcasts on iHeartRadio or on Amazon Music. You can check in with me on Instagram or Twitter/X, and you can watch all of these on Spotify or on YouTube. Until next time, we'll see you.